I will find every last member of the Yotei Six. Then I will join you in death.
Throughout this year, Ghost of Yotei was easily one of my most anticipated games of 2025. After the astounding success that Ghost of Tsushima was, I was dying to see what a continuation of the franchise would look like. And 5 years on from the first game, the sequel lived up to all the expectations I could have had for it. It didn't reinvent the wheel, but I don't need that from a sequel. It took what Ghost of Tsushima did so great and improved on it in a multitude of ways. Also, fans and critics have absolutely loved it, with receiving high scores across the board. But for me, Ghost of Yotei ended up being nearly perfect. There are a few decently sized issues that I have with this game that drag it down that little bit from being a masterpiece. I will be getting into those issues and a lot more in today's video as I go through all the pros and cons and my overall thoughts on Ghost of Yotei. But before we do get into things, if you guys do enjoy this video, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe as we are trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. With that being said, let's jump right into it. Now, getting right into one of the best parts of the game, we have the setting and exploration. This title takes place a little bit over 300 years after the events of Ghost of Tsushima, and for me personally is a massive improvement on the first game. In terms of pure visuals, it is better, but not like substantially, that just boils down to it being newer. So I won't hang too long on the graphics, but they still need to be mentioned as they are truly stunning. Every moment of exploring is screenshot worthy, and I took my fair share of screenshots as I played. Each area you explore is unique from the last and has its own visual pleasures to it. And the use of the wind and the vibrant colors makes for one of the most beautiful titles I have ever played. Which I feel like I say a lot, but I do really mean it. This gorgeous landscape though would mean nothing if exploring wasn't enjoyable. And that is not an issue in the slightest here in Ghost of Yotei. This is the first major improvement that I believe Sucker Punch made in this sequel. Exploring in Ghost of Tsushima was fine, but the side content within the world definitely got repetitive at some point, and I slowly tailed off from doing it to focus on the main quest and character side missions. That was not the case here in Ghost of Yotei, as I engaged with all the side content from the moment I started the game until I rolled credits. I have not had this much fun exploring an open world in a hot minute. It checks off every box that I want from exploration in this style of game. Exploration truly feels seamless and natural. I'm simply riding my horse and uncovering these secrets and areas to explore unintentionally. The world is not artificial or flooded with objectives, they truly just feel like quests and locations I stumble upon, or being led by that bird every 5 minutes and stopping me from ever making progress in the main story. I genuinely would spend hours upon hours just exploring and doing side content and would forget about the main plot of the game. That's when you know you've nailed an open world experience. I also love the different modes that you can play this title in. We have 3 kinds, in the Kurosawa mode, which is in black and white, the Miike mode, which had a closer camera with more blood and mud, and lastly Watanabe mode, which replaces the in-game music with original lo-fi beats made by Shinichiro Watanabe, who is mostly known for his work on Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo, which are some of the most iconic animes of all time. I find this such a unique concept that I see no other games doing, and I really love trying out all the modes at different times. But to touch on the main kinds of side content that you'll be experiencing, there are also 3 kinds. You have your tales, bounties, and myths. The tales are pretty traditional side quests. You complete these missions to get coin, weapon skins, armor, shamisen songs, and things of that sort. Then you have your bounties, which wildly surprised me. Sucker Punch could have easily made these boring and basic, but each one has its own little spin to it, and after doing a certain amount, you get these larger scale bounties with more of a story and mission to them. They were fantastic and not generic whatsoever. Lastly, we had our myths, which are just like the ones in Tsushima. These are special missions where you can unlock legendary gear and techniques. You explore these tales about these legendary people, and you must duel individuals to obtain the gear. These were the main pieces of side content, but even smaller exploration things, like the hot springs, bamboo strikes, altars. They all benefit you as the player as it helps you get new skills, get more spirit or health. There is a use and benefit in exploring the world around you. There was no bloat or unnecessary amount of collectibles. And along with the usefulness of it, you get to have an amazing time doing it, and it was easily one of the best parts of the game, if not the best. But with that being said, let's jump into our next topic of discussion, which is the gameplay. I went into this title with high expectations for its combat, as Ghost of Tsushima was one of my favorite combat systems to date. But I was also worried about how they were going to innovate it enough to make it feel different from its predecessor. And they do more than enough in terms of that regard. I think Yotei once again improves from Tsushima and creates an even more engaging gameplay experience. To replace the stances, we got different weapons. And yes, they ultimately function very similarly, as they are useful against different types of enemies. But I enjoy this change and like the concept of it more. Especially on how you unlock these new weapons. Compared to Tsushima, where unlocking these different stances boiled down to gameplay, the weapons, you had to complete missions where you learned how to use them from masters. I found that to be such a fun and engaging idea. The fact that we had to actively learn this new weapon was really cool, and the masters themselves had decent stories to go along with it. All these different weapons, tooled with the great enemy variety, created a great gameplay loop, where each encounter you were basically using every weapon at your disposal. You had your katana, dual katana, your odachi, yari, and kusurigama. Along with the great variety that is available here, it wouldn't really matter all that much if the combat itself wasn't good. But Yotei does not have that issue whatsoever. They carry over the amazing feeling of combat that you get from Tsushima, but it feels even better here. Firstly, it does feel a bit faster paced in comparison. Simply the speed of the attack felt swifter, but I also felt tools were at your disposal to chain attacks together. Especially the ability to throw weapons, that might have been my favorite addition to the combat. It was so addicting at all times, grabbing a weapon and throwing it and transitioning right back into using your weapon. It was perfect. And something that both entries also did great was having weight behind your attacks. Every single swing of my weapon had a purpose and weight behind it. I wasn't just spamming the attack button and hoping for the best. There was thought behind every swing, counter, and dodge. I would actively be thinking through the whole fight of which weapon do I need here. Okay, let me time this dodge and get off an attack right after. There was such fluidity behind the combat in every move. And having a wide range of different kinds of attacks and special combos made each button press have a meaning behind it, as you can chain together so many different moves together to do really good damage. All of these weapons had their own moves, special abilities, combos, and more. And you learned these through getting skill points and unlocking them, which made the skill tree feel useful, as you were actively obtaining new means of engaging with the combat. But also with exploration and stealth, you gained new skills that changed the gameplay up. The skill tree overall was handled very well, and I felt genuine progression upgrading these abilities. You had skills for all your weapons, your wolf, horse, and stealth, and these upgrades actually improved the gameplay. I felt an active difference once getting them. And along with the skills, simply upgrading your gear like your armor and weapons felt great. Especially the gear, as it changes appearances as you level up, and for the most part I would just wear whatever cool one I wanted to. I didn't care too much about the stats, even though some armor had awesome abilities. Genji's armor set being able to deflect gunshots was so useful late game, it was insane. And there were other armors that had specific abilities like that, which had a direct impact on gameplay past the, oh, there's more defense. On top of all the variety we already have throughout the gameplay, even more comes through the different tools that you can unlock, and these become so useful within combat. We unlock things like the kunai, we have multiple kinds of bombs, 2 bows, and 2 guns. And all of these are genuinely useful within combat, and I would utilize them all throughout my time with the game. I would use kunai to instantly take out the people with bows, smoke bombs to blind enemies to get a few assassinations in. I would quickly use my rifle to take out someone from far away. Like, there are just so many different combinations that can be had within Ghost of Yotei's combat system. Now, the last topic of gameplay I want to discuss briefly is the stealth, as it still remains a pretty important part in this sequel. I do think it was kinda toned back here compared to Tsushima, since the idea of the shinobi and stealth was a prevalent plot point in the first game. But here, it remains fairly basic, with being able to hide in tall grass, bushes, you have chain assassinations, you can use smoke bombs to hide your location, use a kunai to get some stealth kills. It was mostly just stuff like that. I do enjoy though that they added a secondary assassination technique, by using your Kusarigama to assassinate from a long distance. You also eventually unlock this game's version of Eagle Vision per se. Overall, the stealth is definitely not as prevalent as it was in the first game, and I felt like the camps weren't designed around it as much. But it was still useful, and I used it at the start of most camps I went into so I could trim down the amount of enemies there were. I think the gameplay as a whole in Ghost of Yotei was an improvement compared to Tsushima, but not on some crazy scale. I just prefer the fast pace of it, the weapons over the stances, and I found there were better tools overall to use in combat. But I do think that Tsushima has it beat in terms of stealth and the variety that there was in that. But with that, let's move to the last topic of discussion for today's video, and that is the story and narrative. Now, all I have done in this video so far is praise Ghost of Yotei, saying how unbelievable of a sequel it was and how it improves on the first in a multitude of ways. But my title of this video was that it was nearly perfect. So what stops it from reaching that height? I do think that it is the story. I don't think it's bad by any means, but it is the worst part of this title and something that Tsushima does better. Getting into the premise of this narrative, it is a fairly basic one, but not one I have an issue with. Our main protagonist, Atsu, has her family murdered at a young age at the hands of the Yotei 6. And once she grows up, she seeks revenge on these people to avenge her dead family. Now, I don't have any complaints with the premise of this title. Yes, it is extremely basic, and I have played my fair share of revenge plotlines. But I say this about every trope, in that I don't care how overdone it is. If it's done well, I'm gonna like it. But for Yotei, I think it is handled well at times, and at others, it just kind of feels like they forgot the message that they were trying to get across here. The message is that there's more to life than revenge. You should seek to fight for the living and the people that are still here. That revenge will consume you, and you must be able to live past that. Which, of course, very typical, but at times I think they struggle at conveying this idea. But we'll get into that later, as I believe the early portions of the story are fantastic and easily the best parts. I want to start things off with mentioning how they handle Atsu's family. All the content we get from them are through flashbacks, which I don't mind for the most part. I think they do a good job of showing the dynamic here. My only wish is that in the opening of this game, we actually play through the death of her family. I would want to see something like The Last of Us and how they handled their opening 20 minutes of the story. I think that would have been a lot more of an impactful moment and motivated us as the player to get revenge on the Yotei 6. But moving on from that, I think through the first two main enemies that we face in the Yotei 6, being the Oni and Kitsune, are fantastic stories and questlines. They have the proper length to flesh out the villain and give enough build up to their inevitable death. And it wasn't even just the villains themselves, but the supporting characters during these quests. When we are going after the Oni, we have the whole dynamic and reconnection of Atsu and her brother Jubei. And with the Kitsune story, we have Atsu's dynamic with Oyuki, who ended up being the former Kitsune. I think these dynamics are the best in the game, and I think is one of the highlights of Atsu as a character. She really does have great dynamics with the supporting cast of this game, and they really challenge her as a character and where we see a lot of her growth as a person. Her dynamic with Jubei is a really good one, as for the most part, it remains really rocky throughout the entire main story. They have their moments of bonding and connection, and you can tell that they care for one another, but I love that remaining tension caused by time apart and how drastically different each one of them lives now. And Jubei's most important role in this story is showing and trying to get Atsu to move on from the path of revenge that she is on, and live past the trauma that has occurred in their lives and to not be bound by it. This causes heavy tension between one another, and I think it's great. Now for Oyuki, this portion of the game was also fantastic. I love the twist of her being the former Kitsune that was there when Atsu's parents died. It really challenges Atsu as a character, as someone she has come to trust on some level is now someone she needs to take out for the sake of revenge. But ultimately she doesn't, and chooses a path of forgiveness instead of bloodshed and revenge. The first true signs of her changing her path. But past the dynamics, I think the missions going after the Oni and Kitsune are fun and exciting. The level design is handled well. They are very distinct in their own way. How the Oni has this focus on fire and the Kitsune is all about stealth and puzzles. You see that stark contrast in the missions themselves, which I found enjoyable. And the final boss fights against the two are just awesome portions of the game. All of this stuff is great thus far for Yotei, but after finishing those first two members of the Yotei 6 is where practically all my issues come into play for the main story. Now, not all is bad here, as some of my favorite parts still occur from this point forward. But to really tie up all my issues into one broad statement initially, I would say this second half of the game is extremely rushed. Like, you go through the last 3 members at the speed that it took me to defeat one of the Oni or Kitsune. Villains like the Dragon and Spider get no time to be fleshed out as we go through them way too quickly. I feel like we spend so much time getting info on the other members and building up our plan to inevitably face them. Now, for these members, we're just like, yeah, we know where they are, so we're gonna go straight there and attack them. Like, there's no build-up in tension there. I was satisfied when I defeated the Oni and Kitsune. The same cannot be said about any of the remaining members. Now, I do think there are some parts in the second half of this game that are handled well. Firstly, we get introduced to Jubei's daughter, Kiku. Again, I think this is another great dynamic for Atsu. And this one is really pushing the idea of looking towards the future and seeing there is one to be had here. Up to this point, Atsu really doesn't see a future past her revenge, but now she has the chance to be an aunt for Kiku. And I also really enjoy the parallels that do end up occurring between Kiku and Atsu when she herself was a kid. I think they handled those parts of the story very well. We get dedicated missions to just Atsu and Kiku hanging out, which I think are important to build that relationship between the two of them. From picking flowers, stealing medicine, training her. All of that is great. But then again, we get this instead of more content between the Spire and Dragon, when I think we should have gotten both of these things. Another portion I like a lot is the first fight we have against the Spider. It's actually probably one of the best sequences in the entire game. The build-up of the mission with how the Spire was having a play of the day Atsu's family died, us unlocking a new version of the Onryo Hell, the amount of enemies we're taking out, and then the quote after of Atsu talking to Kiku. Like, oh my gosh, Atsu is just so cold throughout the entire game. That was easily one of my favorite parts. But unfortunately, getting back to some more negative sections of the story, we have the final portion of the game. This all starts off right before our fight against the dragon. There is a choice that Atsu makes here. Jubei is begging her to go help him and Oyuki find Kiku and get her to safety after the attack on Matsumai Castle. But Atsu chooses her path of revenge and instead fights the dragon. The game continues, and after we fight the dragon and win, we are unable to find Jubei or Oyuki. We reunite with Kiku though and bring her to our former home. We then seek out the Spire for info and we spare him, while he helps us get to where Lord Saito is keeping them. We proceed to save the two of them and must rush back to our old home as Lord Saito has traveled there. We have one final fight against him with Jubei dying and us defeating Lord Saito once and for all. That was a very quick summary of it, as to talk about my issues with these aspects, we need the full picture as all of it connects. Firstly, the death of Jubei was handled horrifically. I suspected he was going to die, but I can't think of a worse way to have handled it. His death at that point just felt like shock value rather than an actual plot point with emotion and depth. I was like, there's no way that they just did that. That is terribly done. It actually messed with my immersion of the moment. Jubei had to die in the moment where Atsu picked to stay and fight against the dragon. There, she would have faced the consequence of her revenge. Because for this entire game, we have seen no drawback to Atsu's pursuit of the Yotei 6. Sure, she didn't have the best relationship with the people she met along the way, but ultimately she was achieving her goal without losing anything in return. And Jubei's death could have been that loss. They should have done that instead of doing it after her turn in character as she spared the Spider. And I think the Spider should have been the one to take out Jubei, so the confrontation between the two of you could have had so much more depth. Both of you losing a sibling at the hand of one another and having this emotional battle atop of the mountain. It could have been one of the most impactful moments of the entire story. I think in general, there should have been a lot more parallels and dynamics between you and Jubei versus the dragon and Spider, since there is that sibling bond that both groups have, and I wish that was explored more and was the depth of these sections that the game needed. But I think if you make those few changes, all of a sudden Jubei's death has meaning and there's this deeper level in the dragon and spider. I also think there should have been more content in general prior to the fight against the dragon and spider, and I don't know how you conclude the game from there, but in my opinion they gotta extend the final portion before fighting Saito. Like, all of it just happens way too quickly. I genuinely spent about 40 hours going through the Oni and Kitsune, and then finished the game in the following 10 hours. The pacing was just horrific. The final fight against Saito was still good and I enjoyed it. I like Saito a lot as a villain. I just wish he got more screen time, and his limited amount holds him back from being a great character. But I think overall the fight was still good. I liked the scenery behind it, I liked how he went back to our old home for the final fight. I think it was solid. But it genuinely pales in comparison to the emotion that you felt in the final fight against Lord Shimura in Ghost of Tsushima. But another thing I also like in this final portion are the parallels at the end of Kiku being this mirrored situation of Atsu when she was a kid watching her family die. But now this time we are fighting for the future, and Atsu won't let Kiku go down the same path as she did. But also there really isn't anyone to seek revenge on now, as Saito and the Yotei 6 are gone, but I still think it's a nice moment. It just loses some power as Jubei's death was just actually bad. I also think ultimately Atsu as a character is solid. I wish we had her face some more external conflict for her actions and some more eternal issues with this pursuit of revenge. Like, comparing her to Jin Sakai for a moment, he dealt with both those aspects, in being branded as a traitor and villain amongst the samurai who used to be his people, and the internal conflict of abandoning all he has known and the honor he has grown up with. Atsu needed a bit more of that, but still, I think she is a decent protagonist and doesn't hurt the game in any way. I still enjoyed her a lot throughout my entire time with this game, and she has some of the coldest moments I've seen in a minute, so I still liked her. But overall, I think this story just falls apart on many levels after the first two main members are taken out. They rushed through the brothers and Saito, and they needed to develop and flesh them out more. And Jubei's death does not help things at all. The narrative is definitely the weakest portion, but I would still say it's a solid story in the end with some great highs, but also some bad lows. My experience with Ghost of Yotei was an amazing one. I loved every second I had with this title and wished it was even longer than what it was. From the breathtaking open world, dense side content, fluid and weighty combat system with variety, and lastly a solid story. All these aspects tie together and make a fantastic sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, and overall I do think that it is just slightly better than its predecessor. My final rating of Ghost of Yotei is an 8.8 out of 10. If it just had a better story, this game really could have been generational and one of the best of the decade for me. But still, it is one of the best titles I played this year. If you did make it to the end of today's video, thank you guys so much for watching. Your support means the absolute world to me. I had a lot of fun making this video today, so if you did enjoy it, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe, as we are trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. Again, thank you guys so much for the support. It means the absolute world to me. I'll see you in the next video, and God bless.